Hi, and welcome to Facing Stories with JR and Kelsey. I'm the host of today's episode, JR Jameson, the co-founder of the Facing Project. The Facing Project is an organization that connects people through stories to strengthen their communities. We do that by pairing writers and artists with individuals and communities who have a story to share, but oftentimes not the means to share their own story. I'm happy today to be joined. Hi, and welcome to Facing Stories with JR and Kelsey. I'm the host of today's episode, JR Jameson, the co-founder of the Facing Project.
Oh, it just popped up.
The Facing Project is an organization. We're having technical errors. One moment, please. To strengthen their communities. We do that by pairing writers.
That's really interesting.
Okay. Sorry, I'm not sure what happened. That's never happened before. Crap. Sorry. Sorry about that, Ashley.
That's okay.
Hi, and we are back in live. We had a bit of technical difficulties there. I'm not sure what happened, but it happens when you're doing things live. So thanks for understanding, everyone who's watching us right now. And I'm pretty certain that it kept recording that whole time. But anyhow, we roll with the punches here at the Facing Project, and that's what we do. We're delighted to have writer and speaker Ashley Ford with us today. You have maybe heard of Ashley. Ashley is making quite a big name for herself, not only in New York City, but across the world. She has written for BuzzFeed. She used to be a staff writer for BuzzFeed, actually. She writes for Elle magazine, and she's written for The Toast. She's written for The Butter. She's also been on speaking tours with Lena Dunham. She's currently working on a book of essays with Roxane Gay. And numerous other places. I think she also wrote for the Bible.
Also.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, well, not the one that's out now, but a future edition, I think.
A future edition of the Bible, I will have a small byline.
I might be writing for that. Ashley is an individual who puts herself out there, tells her own stories in many ways to help others. And that's why we have her as a guest today to talk about those experiences and hopefully help you, those who are fans of the Facing Project, those who are connecting people in their communities, to learn more about what that looks like, especially from an author like Ashley. I have to say before we begin, I've known Ashley for quite some time. So I just want to give our viewers a bit of that background. So I think it was 2005-ish.
Yes, 2005.
2005. I was working at Ball State University in student voluntary services, and my job was to give presentations to incoming students to talk about what we offered as student voluntary services. And we had groups of students come through, sometimes 10 or 12 a day, and I'd have to give this presentation over and over about student voluntary services is the largest student organization on Ball State's campus. We have 2,000 students involved in the Muncie community. So I would say this over and over. And I'll never forget Ashley coming through. There was something about her that just stood out. She actually paid attention to what I was saying, which was, kind of rare sometimes. That was very nice. But she had this glimmer in her eye where she got it. And she was shaking her head saying, yeah. And I knew right away, like, we've got this girl. And she's going to be a volunteer in student voluntary services. And sure enough, she was. Before Ashley came back to school that fall, I found another job and left Ball State. So I only got to flirt with Ashley for just a little bit during that experience. But I came back, so I took a job at Campus Compact, which promotes volunteerism, community engagement, and higher education across the state of Indiana. Had the opportunity to still work with Ball State and flirt with Ashley off and on for the next 2 years. She actually ended up becoming an advisory council student liaison from Ball State to Campus Compact. So I got to work with her in that capacity. And I've got to see her grow as an individual, as an adult, and then now follow her awesome career. And I'm just so inspired by the work that she does.
I'm inspired by the work you do, JR.
Oh, well, thank you. It's really crazy to think that like 10 years later, we're sitting here having this conversation.
Like when you had like as soon as you said that and you were like 2005, I was like, oh God, like, that's That's right. It was 2005.
10 years ago. And of course, we've not aged. We've gone back in time, the two of us. So
I'm much cuter.
Yeah, we're both way much cuter than we were at that time. But here we are. Well, I want to start off talking about your personal essays that you write. Before you went on to become a staff writer for BuzzFeed, you had an active blog and you were putting yourself out there. You worked for an ad agency in Indianapolis. You'd written for Indianapolis Monthly, but you started telling these stories about your own life. And oftentimes those stories were connected to abuse. There were stories about sexual violence. What made you decide this is going to be my platform and I want to put my story out there for others?
I think what initially made me decide to start writing about my own experiences with tough things is the fact that I knew that I liked writing. I had been writing for a while and I read something that said, if you're struggling with what you want to write or what kind of writer you want to be, a good place to start is to write what you wanted to read when you were younger. Or, as my friend Aisha says, to be the person you needed when you were a teenager.
Yeah.
And I thought about that and I thought about what I was going through at that time in my life. And I wanted to share those stories. That's just one of the reasons. Another reason was I think shame is toxic.
Yeah.
And I was ashamed of things that had happened to me that really didn't have anything to do with who I was. And I didn't want that to be the case. So I thought if I talk about it, if I break that silence, if I allow people in and I allow myself to look out into the world and see that I wasn't the only person that this happened to, and unfortunately won't be the only person that this happens to, I can get rid of some of that shame and I can start living my life more authentically.
Yeah. Laverne Cox, the amazing Laverne Cox, I've had the opportunity to see her speak live before, and she talks about shame. And she talks about how shame is when we accept the guilt the other people put on us.
Yes.
But writing obviously has been something that has helped break that shame away and break out of the core. Would you say that it's been a healing process through writing?
I would say it's part of my healing process. But I think the writing of it is sort of inconsequential. I think the root of what I'm doing is telling my story unapologetically.
Yeah.
And I choose to do that through writing. So yes, that does help, but it doesn't have to be writing. I could just talk to my friends. I could just talk to my therapist, I could just talk to the people who love and care about me. Not that my therapist necessarily loves and cares about me. I mean, I'm pretty sure she cares. But I still, but just telling that story and telling it in a way that is very factual, like just this is what happened. And it's not about where I was, what I was wearing, who I was with, those things don't matter. What matters is that I should not have to bear the shame for something that, has affected me, not that I brought on to myself.
Yeah. And those voices within ourselves to put on page, to put out there, create connections, but sometimes we don't know what will happen with those words once they're out there. And at the Facing Project, our mission is to connect people through stories to strengthen communities. And we've seen that happen in amazing ways when people are brave enough to stand up and share their story in a vulnerable way. There's a vulnerability that's involved with that, and you know that. And putting those stories out there, but seeing the connections they create. I heard you say just yesterday that this isn't so much about me being a writer, but it's about how I can help other people and the connectivity that happens. Can you talk a little bit about people who have come out of the woodwork and some of those stories where people have said, you helped me because you shared your story of who you were in a very vulnerable, raw, and real way?
Absolutely. One of the first essays that I put out online, I put out on a blog and it was called The Sins of My Father. And that essay was essentially about the fact that for years I had been lying to people about why my father was in prison. I was open about the fact that my father was in prison, and then people would ask me why, and I would say, I don't know. And the truth was, when I was 14, I found out that he was in prison because he sexually assaulted someone. And I was so ashamed of that. And I had so much shame. Like, what he did said something about me that I just told people I didn't know why he was there. So I wrote this essay about that. And it was probably the first experience I had with writing about something to like break away from shame. And a friend of mine, like an acquaintance on campus, because I wrote that while I was still at Ball State, an acquaintance on campus. It was this really, you know, like really smart, really involved, like SGA president, you know, like this really guy about campus, you know, whatever, just Facebook messaged me and was like, my dad's in prison too.
Oh, wow.
And I don't tell people that. And I've always felt like I couldn't tell people that. And you have no idea what it means to know that you are also someone who is, you know, like a successful student who has a parent in prison. I thought I was the only one.
Yeah.
So
how did that change your perspective about that? About the fact that there was this other individual on campus who was SGA president, their father was in prison as well, and you had this epiphany of, I'm not the only one. Did it change your perspective on it? Did you create a connection with this individual then that became a friendship? Can you talk a bit about what that looked like?
I think after that, he and I kind of always had like a, you know, like when you see someone and it's like, you just know, like there's like a thing there, there's a connection there. I think both of us felt a little less alone. Not just on campus, but in the world, which, you know, is such a blessing and so lovely when you can have that with a person. I also think that it showed me that when I wrote things like that, even though they were hard, that what I was doing was a practice. And it was a practice in a way that I didn't even realize when I wrote it. Like when I wrote it, I knew that part of the reason I was writing it was because I was tired of being ashamed and I shouldn't have to be. So it was accomplishing that. I didn't realize that it was also a practice in offering my experience as sort of, I want to say a buoy for other people, something that a lifeline that you throw to other people to say, you're not alone and you're okay and you're not crazy. And those feelings you're having, a lot of other people are having them, you know, or at least me. And I know how helpful that can be to just know even one other person in the world knows how you feel.
Yeah. Would you say that experience in some ways pushed forward your career to say, this is my platform? And can you talk a bit about that jumping off point where you said, I'm going to focus my writing on this?
I think the jumping off point actually came in a class with a professor I had named Jill Chrisman. Jill, at the end of the year, was looking over an essay I had written, which was essentially parts of The Sins of My Father with like more information. And there was a theme of all these essays that I had written, which were basically, you know, shame and my dad and, you know, like all these different situations. And she just looked me square in the eye and said, Ashley, this is a book. This isn't like, these essays are fine. Like they're good essays, but it like this whole thing is a book and you should probably be the person who writes that book. And from there, I think like I didn't all the way take her seriously, you know, but I did realize that I had something there and that what I was writing wasn't just helping me, it was affecting people. And it was affecting their perspectives and it was affecting, you know, their thoughts. And the idea that my writing could do that was addictive, that I could put my thoughts and things out there and I wanted to play with it. I didn't want it to be like, you know, oh, you have to be writing about these high, you know, like these high tension topics, like, you know, sexual assault, racism and poverty. And so you don't have to be writing about those things in order to get people to feel something. So I started playing with, you know, how subtle can I get? Like, what are the things that I can write about that aren't necessarily things that light people or like excite them like all the time, but people still feel connected to, and it still alters them.
Yeah.
And I think sort of that's my platform now, is how can I be real without being melodramatic?
Yeah.
And how do because I think ultimately my goal is to like get rid of that shame, not just for myself, but for other people.
Yeah.
I think the only way I can do that is by normalizing these otherwise taboo or shameful things.
Yeah.
You know, I talk about being broke a lot. I talk about mental illness a lot. And I talk about them in ways that aren't necessarily like, but I talk about them as very normal, everyday parts of my life.
Right.
Because they are very normal, everyday parts of a lot of people's lives.
And you do that outside of essays that are published in these major outlets. You also do it on Twitter. You do it on Facebook. And it really is a conversation thread that people can follow. In some ways, that freaks out older generations. Ashley and I are at a conference right now here in Muncie, where Facing Project is headquartered, the Midwest Writers Workshop, which if you haven't been, I'll just put a plug. Completely amazing conference. All of these editors from major publishing houses in New York are here in Muncie, Indiana, and people are talking about it. And it's so crazy. And so putting a plug in for that, we'll post information next year on Facing Projects so you can learn. But individuals at this conference, I went to your session on becoming published online, and you talked a lot about Twitter and getting your voice out there and having these conversations. And it seems to scare older generations, but it's really connected you to people who then follow your work, find their own voices, and it can really impact the way that their lives are developed.
Absolutely.
Can you talk about like some of the connections you've created just from getting your story out on that platform in 140 characters or less?
Well, probably the two most important connections I've made via Twitter are the first being my friend and mentor, Roxane Gay.
Yes.
Who has written actually 3 books, but just in the past year, has had 2 really majorly successful books, her fiction novel, An Untamed State, and then her collection of essays, Bad Feminist. She's amazing. And I loved her when she was I loved her before she had a book.
Yeah.
Before she had the first book, Aidi. I lived here, I was in school, I found some of her writing online. I started following her on Twitter. Eventually we started talking on Twitter. She came and did a reading in Indianapolis. I went to the reading in Indianapolis and met her, and now we have a friendship, like a whole full friendship and a collaborative, partnership in some ways, or at least, with the book we're working on as well. And, having that connection has been invaluable because Roxane is also really, really good at giving really great advice. And also when she's too busy to do something, she's really good at telling people like, I can't do that. Here is a list of other writers who I think would be, good for this project for you or for this interview or whatever. And fortunately, sometimes my name is on that list, and people reach out to me, and that's how some people become familiar with my work, which is fantastic. The other person in the past 2 years was Lena Dunham. Lena saw something that I had written. She tweeted me. I tweeted her back. We started DMing each other, which then started us emailing each other. And then I went to New York because I was still living here at the time. I went to New York to spend a long weekend with her and just hang out with her. And, a lot of stuff has happened since then. Like now it's, I live in New York, she lives in New York, we see each other more often, and it's really great. But she has been so supportive and so helpful, just in anything that I want to do or that I try to do. She's right there. Yeah. And it's really beautiful.
And you went on her book tour.
I did go on her book tour. When her book, Not That Kind of Girl, came out, I initially, we didn't know if I was going to be able to be on her book tour because it was during October and I was at a writing conference, or not a writing conference, a writing residency called Hedgebrook. And
on the other side of the country.
On the other side of the country. And it just so happened that she had a date in Seattle that worked with the residency that I could leave the island and go be her guest.
Serendipity.
It was really serendipitous, and it was really lovely. We also, one of the things Lena and I bonded over was a food blog that we love called Gluten Free Girl. And Gluten Free Girl lives on Vashon Island, which is right off of Seattle.
Oh, get out.
So
Seriously.
we invited her to come to
And
the
she
reading,
came.
and she came.
She should go.
And hung out with us.
That is amazing.
Which then turned into her flying to New York for my birthday and cooking us a birthday dinner.
Yeah.
It was, like.
Oh, I saw those pictures on Instagram. Were you on a table? I think I recall you standing on a table.
Absolutely standing on a table. Yeah.
Let me ask this question. You don't have to go deep in this. Are you an advisor on girls? Are you advising girls?
I am not an advisor on girls.
Well, I wondered about that. I've been wondering.
I am not an advisor on girls. Lena knows she can ask me whatever. And, like we have good things, but I mean, she's the genius there. She's the TV writer. She's the director. She's doing all that. I don't even know what I would be able to offer her in that regard.
Yeah.
But I am working on some like scripty type stuff, and eventually she and I will talk about that. But but other than that, I've been on set a couple times just hanging out. It's fun. It's work for her. It's fun for me.
Right. Oh, I would eat it up as well.
Yeah.
Those connections among writers are really important. I think as writers, oftentimes it's a solo career.
Yes.
Oftentimes we get into our little spaces, we have our rituals. For me, I have to go on a run. I have to clear my mind, and I come back and I have the chair that I sit in and I write. And I think it's so easy to get caught in that space and then putting it out there and seeing how it impacts people and that good feeling. But Kelsey and I often talk about how our connection around the Facing Project and working with people on stories and getting these stories out there have connected us in a way that we never even expected. Him as a very, and he'll say this, these are not my words, he'll put that out there. Him as a very heterosexual white guy from rural Ohio, and then me being from rural Indiana, but obviously a very gay man. We're completely different in so many ways, but we have found similarities and understanding across difference because of our relationship that not only has strengthened our friendship, but it's also strengthened the way that we write and the way that we write together. Kelsey recently wrote a blog post for my birthday, which was embarrassing and made me cry because I'm the gay one out of the two, right? So I'll admit, like I have feelings, and it made me cry, and it was fine, but in a good way. But he wrote about how he had always traveled alone, he'd always written alone, he had done all these things alone, but the Facing Project brought us together, and it made him realize that we're better together, and writers are more powerful when we bring our power together to make a difference. And that's happening with your relationship with Roxanne, your relationship with Lena. Can you talk a bit about the project with Roxanne and where that may go?
Yeah, which is also funny because that project kind of started on Twitter as well. There was an article that came out that was basically a woman who had been assaulted in a certain way was kind of like, it wasn't that bad. I just thought it wasn't that bad what happened to me because I had heard about worse things happening to other women. And, Roxanne made a comment about like this idea of not that bad. And then I think I followed up and we had that conversation. And I'm pretty sure like a random Twitter follower was like, you could like put a whole book of essays out about this. And we were like, you totally could. And, we just came up with the idea for the name, Not That Bad, Dispatches from Rape Culture, which is basically about, how we put these value judgments on sexual assault and the different kinds of sexual assault and what happens to a woman and how that keeps women from talking about what's happening to their bodies, and also keeps them from reporting when something does happen to them. Not that reporting is always the answer, like everybody's different. But there is a lot that happens there. And, it sucks that, you go to Mardi Gras and a guy pulls your top down and
you didn't
exposes you, and that's not something you asked for, but then somebody else goes, well, at least you weren't raped, or at least he didn't hit you, or women who are raped who then go, at least he didn't kill me. Like there there are all these things that we come up with to rationalize why we don't have to deal with what's happened. Because it's, even if it's not your fault what happened to you, and it's like never your fault when somebody does something like that, we come up with a lot of reasons not to challenge what happened to us and to chalk it up as that's just what happens.
And that can create shame.
Absolutely.
Because you internalize
absolutely
it for years.
You don't talk about it because you're ashamed.
But these stories, these compilation of essays, hopefully will get voices out there.
Yes.
So people will read this, they'll recognize it wasn't right that my top was pulled down at Muncie Girl, Mardi Gras. It happens all over the world.
Yeah.
You know, sexual violence is not associated with one community, one city. It is worldwide.
No, it's rampant. It's rampant, and it has to do with how we value women and how we value women's bodies. And way too often women's bodies are considered a necessary trade for the reputations or futures of men.
Yeah.
You know, and boys, it's, you know, well, yeah, he did that, but he's got his whole future ahead of him. Or yeah, he did that, but he could be really useful in this way. So, you know, she should just have to bear that in her body, and she should just have to live with what's happened to her. And the fact that, you know, it's a hard realization to come to, and it's one you shouldn't have to come to, that your body and your agency was worth less than someone else's reputation.
Yeah, it's crazy to even think that that is okay.
Yeah.
We worked recently with a project on facing sexual violence where stories were told of mainly women, but some men who had been raped or harassed. And I was just amazed at the number of stories and the voices we heard of people saying, no one believed me. People just simply did not believe that I was actually raped. But when you look at national statistics, it's something like 98% of actual reported cases are true. It's only like 2% of cases are false. Yet our conversation as society is still victim blaming.
Yes.
And that just blows my mind that that happens. And so I hope these essays that you and Roxanne are working on make a change. I think it will, because you both have an amazing platform to make that difference. Are you hearing any queer voices in that conversation? Because I know
some
in the queer community, oftentimes we're afraid to talk about abuse. We're afraid to talk about violence, mainly because stigma that's still placed on us being queer. And oftentimes, depending on the community, people are afraid to come forward, even admit that. And then to say that I was sexually violated or that I was abused, people are afraid to have those voices. Do you plan to include queer voices in these conversations?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely we do, because it's necessary. Roxanne and I are both queer.
Yeah.
You know? So that absolutely is important to us in this collection, to have those voices represented, because they're not represented enough. And also because, you know, if we can get people to talk about it, you know, like, yes, like that's a victory in and of itself, to get people to talk about it. I also think, unfortunately, when queer people are sexually assaulted or sexually abused, it goes one of two ways. When it's a woman sexually abusing a woman, if that's how they identify, people generally think, how does a woman sexually abuse a woman? You know what I mean? Like they think the mechanics don't work or something like that. And then when it's a man sexually abusing a man, a lot of times they just go, well, what do you know, like it becomes, it's almost identical to how they like victim blame a girl in a short skirt.
Right.
You know what I mean?
For it.
You asked for it in a way, just by being who you are. So, and I also think that that also gets put under the umbrella of gay bashing a lot. And then people don't call it sexual assault. They just call it like gay bashing. And it's like, no, that's rape. Like, and it's not that it can't be both, but you know, use the words. It's important to use the words, because that's how people identify what this is and why it's a crime and why it's wrong.
That's right. When you work on essays like this, and when you get a platform that has become as big as your platform, where you're publishing in major outlets and you're sharing these sensitive topics, talking about sensitive topics, and we found this on with Facing, you have people who come out as champions and say, your story helped me, this topic or this project you're doing is really helping me. But then you also get those people who violently come out and say like, I disagree with you, or why would you write about that? And they try to create this argument in that space. Can you talk a bit about what that's like? Because when you blog and you don't have a major audience yet, oftentimes you're getting your friends and family who are saying like, we're so proud of you, like you're amazing, like keep going. But then once you publish in a major outlet and your words are out there for millions of people to read, not everybody's going to love what you have to say or what you're working on. How do you manage that negativity?
I kind of don't. I very much believe, first of all, in curating your online experience the way you curate your life. If somebody is online like being abusive or something like that and calling me fat and things like that, like I wouldn't hang out with that person in real life. It's really easy to unfriend, unfollow, or block. You know, when someone brings that kind of, you know, negativity into your space where it's not just negativity, it's harmful. And then, you know, some people are just disagreeing with you. I try to listen to those people and hear what they're saying. And as long as they're being respectful, that's fine.
Because it opens a conversation.
Because it opens across a conversation.
Which educates people, right?
Absolutely. If they're not being respectful, they can go too, because I wouldn't hang out with you in my real life.
So
I don't have to hang out with you online. You have to protect your spaces online. And you also have to like tell yourself some very, very real things and some very real truths. And you have to decide how much of that you internalize. Personally, I go by a few different mottos. One of my mottos is don't start none, won't be none. Which is basically, you know, if I don't want to have a conversation with someone, I don't go start a conversation with them. Secondly, anybody who doesn't love me or pay me doesn't get to, you know, really affect my opinion about what I'm writing or what I'm putting out there or what I'm saying. And third is that people, whether people like me or not, is none of my business. When I'm writing, it's one of those things where it's like, if I'm being myself and I like me and I'm proud of me and I have a really good grasp, I think, on what it means to be a good person, I'm not concerned about likability. I don't need anybody to like me for me to be effective. And that doesn't mean, you know, be an asshole because I can. That doesn't mean be a jerk because I can. You know what I mean? I don't want to be that way to people. And so I try not to. And if I know that I'm doing my best, you know, to be a good person and to be a person who, you know, not necessarily that people want to listen to. I guess I don't really much care if people want to listen to me. I just care that I'm saying things that are right, that I'm saying things that are authentic and true. And that the people who want to hear that message can get to it, and that it's accessible.
Because these are your stories.
They're absolutely mine. And I think
and they're not to be edited.
No, they're not.
And I completely agree with you.
Shame, you know, it's like you said, when you're letting other people wanting you to feel guilty, like that's what turns into shame. I think it's also letting people own and change your narrative. Like, you know the truth about who you are and what you've done. And you know for a fact, you have to know, and if you don't know, you need to know that you are more than the worst thing you ever did.
That's right.
You are better than the worst choice you ever made. You know, like you absolutely are. That's why you know it was wrong, and that's why you know it was a bad choice. And you can't let people take those things and use them against you for the rest of your life, because some people will. Some people like that. It makes them feel powerful, and it makes them feel above you. And you can't afford to let someone else run your life.
And you mentioned yesterday in your talk that people will troll your site, troll your Twitter, and go back 5 years ago, just trying to find something to catch you, to make you not be authentic. And there are those people out there who do that. I mean, we've seen it with numerous celebrities, you know, where tweets have come out after the fact saying this and that about them, to try to ruin their reputation in that way. But part of it is rising above that, like you said.
And it's not, in some cases, you did say something, you know, really messed up 4 years ago. Apologize and say, I know I said that 4 years ago.
And that's not where I've grown.
This is where I've grown. And I'm sorry, and I hope, you know, that doesn't make people feel like I'm a bad person and not want to interact with me. At the same time, I can't really live back there.
Right. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
That's the thing, is even if you apologize for things that happened in the past, don't let people force you to go live back there.
Right.
Because you're done with that. You've already lived it.
Yeah.
You've already gone through an entirely new process.
Acknowledge it, apologize, and move on. That's right. But Twitter isn't all bad. So online presence, great things can happen. One thing that did happen last year during the Ferguson riots, you took to Twitter and you used your platform to say, this is not right. This breaks my heart that this is happening. There are kids in Ferguson right now who are going to the library to seek safe shelter, safe space. And you took to Twitter to talk about that. And with you and many of your friends and others who jumped on board, there was like $500,000 or something crazy that was raised overnight for the Ferguson Library, all through the power of social media and voice and platform. Can you talk a bit about like what's evolved because of that since?
I would say because of that, you know, I think that was the first time I realized that I have, or let myself admit that I have a little bit more influence than I wanted to admit, that I think I still want to admit a lot of the time. But it was also that whole thing was just a huge learning experience, because really it was, you know, I realized that when I'm frustrated and when I feel something and when I have a good idea, if, you know, or just an idea, if I share that idea, it can make major changes, you know, because of the money that we raised for Ferguson Library. They were able to do these healing kits for kids in the community, where kids got you know, a book and some information for the parent about how to talk to their kid about, you know, what was happening, and they got a stuffed animal. Awesome. You know, and it was this really beautiful thing that the director there, Scott Bonner, you know, under his fantastic leadership, they were able to do that. They were able to finally hire a second full-time librarian. Yeah. Which was huge.
Amazing. And she's the children's librarian too, right?
Children's librarian specifically. Scott has was, I believe, named Librarian of the Year.
And went to New York recently to get an award, right?
He went to New York. He also has come to New York. He was getting trained by NPR for to record stories in Ferguson for StoryCorps. He's an amazing man. He does amazing work. You know, and for him, it's so funny because during this whole process, he's mostly just been like, it's my job. You know, like that's it. Well, just doing my job. Like he, you know, he's a very humble man. But from that has basically just come, like, you know, I think there was a little more recognition. There were a lot of friends of mine who demanded recognition when news outlets and publications started writing about what had happened with the raising money, and had completely left me out of it. Right. You know, and I had friends and colleagues, you know, reach out to these publications and be like, you know, you're writing about the Ferguson Library. And the person who raised all this money was a person of color, and you completely left her out of the story, and that's not okay. And I probably never would have said anything, because I was pretty much just like, oh, you know, I didn't even really mean for all this to happen. I'm glad it did, but that wasn't my goal. But I would say from that, I mostly just realized that people are more powerful than they realize, and when we all do something, like just anything, we do a big something. We do a big anything, and you can change people's lives. And that's just, it's a beautiful thing. I mean, it's a dream of mine. I grew up in libraries, that I would be able to help a library. Like, I don't know.
Town. Several states away now.
Several states away now. You know, that's the power of social media. And I don't know that I would have been able to do that. You know, at any other time.
But it's happening. Kelsey and I had the opportunity to travel to Ferguson, and we've met some with folks in the community, and we met with Scott. And right away, when we told him where we were from, he said, oh yeah, Ashley Ford, you know, like helped us raise all this money. And he literally was sitting among a pile of books that were way above his head. And I was just like, wow. And he said, yeah, you know, brought attention to our community. She really brought attention to the library, helped us raise funds. People continue to send resources and books to our library. And that's, I mean, this library is really small. I don't know how to explain it, but when
Yeah.
I pulled up on it, I was like, wow, that's a really small, unassuming library.
Yeah.
And so just to think about how through you and the power of social media, the world came together and is making a difference in these kids' lives.
Mm-hmm.
And it's pulling away from what I think mainstream media has focused so much on, the riots, which is important to talk about what's happening in Ferguson, but it's also important, those stories that aren't being shared.
Oh yeah, the people who woke up every morning and cleaned up the streets.
Yeah.
You know, the teachers who, despite school being closed, volunteered and took their, you know, like went to the library to help with the kids, the volunteers who are helping process all those books that got sent to the library.
Yeah. Those are stories that are not being shared by the media. And I think through your platform and various other platforms, those stories are going to get out there.
I hope so.
And I hope that they help change the conversation or add a new conversation to what it means to be in a community and what community means.
Absolutely.
And that even if a community is put on a national spotlight in that way and has become the poster child for what's happening across America, let's be honest about that.
Yes.
What's happening across America, they became the poster child of that in many ways. But then we have this whole segment of people that just focus on that and forget about what else is happening in the community and all the people who have come out to make a difference each day, but went above and beyond to make those difference in that community. So love the work that you're doing there. You have another big project that's coming up that I want to talk about for a little while with our viewers called Worn to Death. And I saw you start posting about this several months back. Your grandmother passed away. She had given you a sweater. And I saw you posting on social media about this. And I was like, what a cool idea. And you're moving forward with Worn to Death. Can you talk a bit about what that is and where it's going?
Yes, Worn to Death is a photo project. When my first of all, my grandmother and I were very, very, very close.
She helped raise you, right?
Yes, she helped raise me. Throughout my life, I've lived in the same house with her more years than I've not. Yeah, she was an amazing woman. You know, in my mind, she still is an amazing woman. But when she passed, I found that, you know, what I went to usually express myself, which was writing, was not sufficient, and it wasn't helping me. And what ended up being really helpful to me was taking photos. In the process of taking photos, I just started thinking about images in general, because with my grandma passing, the thing that I was worried about the most was like, am I going to lose my images of her in my mind? You know, we don't have a lot of pictures together, she and I. You know, she didn't really like pictures. So I don't have a ton of her and even less of us together. But I wanted to hold on to my images in my mind. And I think that's why I started doing just taking photographs. And, you know, because I am how I am, I wanted to learn how to take photographs better and better and better. And I'm learning so much. I'm still very much a beginner. But
they're excellent. I've seen some of your work. So they're
but I mean, I'm trying. And another thing that I noticed after my grandma died was how much it affected the way I wanted to dress and the way I wanted to look. I don't believe I was trying to look like her, but, you know, one of the memories that I kept coming up with is, you know, how she always wanted me to, you know, wear more like lipstick and stuff like that. And I started wearing lipstick every day. I still wear lipstick almost every day, which was something that was not true just 7 months ago. And I also had these sweaters of hers, one that she gave me while she was living, and another that I took after she passed. And the one she gave me while she was living was white, and the last photo I ever have with her, I'm wearing the white sweater. And then after she passed, I found the black sweater in her closets, and I wore that to her funeral. And I started thinking a lot about clothes, and I started thinking a lot about all of her clothes and how she was this glamorous woman, and how I wanted so many of like her clothes, like her things, and not necessarily even to like wear, but to sort of like keep this image of her and to keep like part of her close to me. Plus, clothes usually smell like the person, you know, who's wearing them. So a lot of her clothes still smelled like her. And I started taking photos of myself wearing the sweaters or wearing like the jewelry and stuff that she had given me, or that I was able to have after she passed. And I started talking about it on Twitter one day, that I was like so into like the clothes and stuff, and other people started talking about the things that they had. And I was like, oh, maybe I could write something about this. Maybe I could interview people and write. Then I was like, I don't want to do like a big like writing project. I want to see it. And I want to see how people wear the things that their family member has left behind, and I want to photograph the object, and I want to photograph the person, and then I just want them to answer a few basic questions. And that's pretty much how the Worn to Death project came to life. And I think when I first started talking about it, I wasn't really ready to execute it. I wanted to know if people were interested, and I wanted to like get something going, but I wasn't really ready to execute it, and I was overwhelmed by the response. And now I'm ready to start executing that project, and I'm ready to like, get her done. And it's the response is even bigger this time, but I'm excited. I'm really, really excited about it.
Yeah. How many folks have reached out to you?
So far, I think I sent the link out Monday, and so far I have about 152 responses.
That's amazing.
And that's just from like putting it out once on my social media.
And they're all over.
They're all over. There are people all over the world who signed up. And I'm hoping, there are some places that I'm just going anyway. Like I have travel plans over the next 6 months that I'm going to try to hit. And if the project is doing really well, and if I'm feeling really good about it, then I might try to, like save up some money or raise some money to be able to go to other places.
That's
and
awesome.
Take photos.
That is really, and some of the pieces have gone beyond clothing. I think I understand. Is that true? So initially the idea was to use clothing, the whole idea of Worn to Death. But you've had other people who have reached out to you.
People have reached out to me with different options, and I'm still trying to figure out whether or not those are in line with the project, and if I can make that work. And if I can make it work, then I will. Because there really are so many different kinds of loss and grief. I know that I do want to keep it to people. Like I understand that like pets are like in pet love.
But that's another project.
That's a different project. So I do want to keep it at this point to humans. But I also want to be cognizant of the fact that like, there are different kinds of death. There are people who, have like don't speak to a parent anymore because that parent was, like not good for them or abusive or something like that. And so that person's not in their life. And that is a kind of death.
It's a loss.
And that is a loss.
Major loss.
And you definitely grieve that relationship. So I'm open to, the right kind of, thing like that too.
So once you put this mosaic, and maybe that's not the right term for it, but in some ways when I like think of your project and the idea in my mind, I see like this mosaic of photographs and stories of people coping with death, loss, grieving, and it's through these objects that meant so much to the person they loved, or maybe it was a gift from that person to them. That's the one thing that's still tangible in this world that they can hold on to. And this image I have in my mind is just completely amazing and beautiful. Do you think you'll ever take it out to an exhibit? Have an art exhibit around it?
Wow. It's so weird to like, you say that and it's like, I could understand where you were about to go with that question. But I was like, I know what he's about to ask and I don't know the answer. I think it just never occurred to me that anybody would want to have it in an exhibit. But I'm always open to things like that. I love art. And, I love visual artists, and I'm not traditionally a visual artist. And I think, that's something that I would never want to come in and be like, look at this, what I mean? But I also understand like wanting to make what I do accessible in many different ways. And I love the idea of sharing any art in multiple platforms. So, the fact that people can get it online and they could get it physically would be amazing and beautiful. And I would love to do that. But I don't think I really thought about it in that way. I don't think I thought about turning it into an exhibit. I'd have to ask a lot of questions from people who
I think it would be powerful. And you're already an artist, so you know, it's just the different level of artist that comes out. And so, and I think like for myself, you know, I used to dabble in writing back in the day, and I would always say, oh, I'm not really a writer. And now I'm dabbling into that more. And sometimes I find myself saying like, well, I'm not a real writer like some of my other friends, but then owning that identity and saying, yeah, you know what, actually I am. And so I think with you too, you definitely would be in the category of visual artist once this project launches. And I see you on tour. I see it as a traveling exhibit across the country.
I mean, that would be beautiful. You know, travel is like this one thing. It's so funny knowing Kelsey or whatever. I actually helped Kelsey a little bit on the second edition.
Yeah, you were his intern, right?
Intern. But I've never been out of the country, and that's something that I'm actually a little insecure about. I didn't really get the chance to travel as a young adult the way I wanted to, and I think the next phase of my life is about finding ways to travel and to do so in a way that, you know, I guess is helpful.
Yeah. Word to Death will premiere in London in 2016. Maybe. I don't know.
I'll write that down. That's a bucket list. That's a life goal.
But we'd love to say, I think it's a project, like you said, people come out from all around the world to say, I have these objects. It's a universal truth that people have, and you're giving it a platform to share it. So I think it deserves to be an exhibit. I'm not trying to strong arm you anyway, but I just totally think the internet is a great place to spread it. But I think just people being able to be there in person and being able to touch these pictures and connect with them in that way is very different. And you go. I think like awesome project. I think it's going to be a big thing.
Thank you.
I've kept Ashley for a long time.
I
really appreciate how much time you've given me. I know you're very busy. She's actually here and back in Muncie from New York for Midwest Writers. They brought her in as a faculty member to work on the conference. She's also on the committee. So she's just in town for a couple of days. She's stretched very thin. And so I appreciate that you were willing to take almost an hour to sit down with me to have this conversation. I guess last thing I would love for you to share. We work with writers all across the country who oftentimes are new writers. They have a love for writing. They've never been published either online or in print. And doing a facing project story is really the first time that the piece they're writing is getting put in a book that's only being spread locally and sometimes in different communities once we put it on our website. And sometimes people are really vulnerable because they're like, well, I've never really written and I'm writing a person's story and it's really sensitive and it's breaking down these walls of shame and I don't know that I can do it. What would you say to a young writer watching us right now or watching this once it downloads on our YouTube channel? What advice would you give them to say you are a writer and you have a voice in you that can help others? What would you say, like, what's your advice to keep going?
First of all, I would say that writers write. You don't have to be published to be a writer. You don't have to have writer friends to be a writer. You don't need anybody else to give you permission to be a writer. All you have to do is write. So as long as you're writing, you're a writer. And, you know, it is both a blessing and a responsibility to tell someone else's story and talk about their sensitivities and their vulnerabilities and their life. And if you understand that, then you're the best person to tell their story because you're going to be careful with them. You're going to be careful with their story. You're going to tell the truth, but you're going to also have compassion and empathy, which means you're going to tell a very human story. And human stories are the most beautiful, most effective, most life-altering stories you can tell, in my opinion. So I would say just keep going. Get the words down on the page. If you don't like the way they look the first time, that's what editing is for. You know, the hardest part is getting the words down. And once you do that, everything else is Legos. Everything else is building and changing and thinking about colors. And, you know, it's the best part of the process for me. And it could be a really lovely part of the process for you as well. Very
solid, sound advice to create difference, understanding across difference, and that's what writing can do when you write in a very empathetic way. I love you, Ashley. I think people who know me know that I'm not much of a hugger, but I love Ashley. So I'll hug her. So this is a rare moment that hopefully somebody did a screenshot of this to keep. And so
let's hope.
Again, I appreciate how much time you've given us today, how much you continue to inspire me to watch you grow, build this wonderful career in New York and around the world. And you truly are making a difference with the pen, on stage, with your voice, and all the work that you continue to do. So keep it up, keep pushing through. I know you write about financial stress sometimes,
I do,
but I think you know this, that because you speak about it, don't let it keep you down. Keep doing what you're doing, because this is what you were made to do and meant to do. And so I appreciate you sharing your voice with others. Thank you for joining us today for Facing Stories. Our next episode of Facing Stories will be coming up in a couple of weeks, and we'll post that on all of our social media outlets so you can plug in and watch it live. You can visit our YouTube channel to find past episodes of Facing Stories and guests we have interviewed. And to find out what's happening with the Facing Project across the country, you can visit our website, which is facingproject.com. Until next time, thank you. Bye.